Everyone, welcome to the Thursday Night Adventures Club of Los Angeles broadcast. Glad to have you tuning in tonight. If you like what you see tonight, please dial in and subscribe to the channel so you get this content every week. You'll get notified. Follow the website. We also have podcasts of everything we're doing, so you can take it on the road with you. We're on all the major podcast channels. So entertain yourselves with this. So tonight we have Michael Nelson. He's a photojournalist. He does a number of interesting projects. Notably, he spent some time in the Middle East as station chief. I'll let you explain more about that in a minute. But he's coming tonight with a story of some research that he did into a Holocaust survivor who was a relative of a friend of his. A very interesting story. So, Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here tonight.
Glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, yes. As you mentioned, I was a photojournalist until about 2 years ago. And since that time, I've been working on some personal projects. But I'll tell you a little bit about my background first. And then, of course, we're going to get into this personal project that he mentioned about my friend's father's Holocaust survival story. So my father was in the Foreign Service, so I spent a lot of time overseas, born in Tunisia, hence this other interest in Hannibal. Yes. And so we moved around a lot during when I was growing up. We would spend a couple years, 2 or 3 years overseas, and 2 or 3 years back in Washington, D.C. So I was born in Tunisia, Carthage, Tunisia, and then my father was stationed in Rhodesia at the time. It was called Rhodesia, and then we'd go back to the United States. So my first memories in life are actually when I was living in the Philippines, in Baguio, the Philippines. My father was in Vietnam at the time, and they didn't want to have families living in Vietnam, so we were living in this mountain town called Baguio. So my first recollections of life are there. Fascinating place, and that's also where I was exposed to like war stuff, because the Baguio happened to be the headquarters after Manila fell, where the Japanese set up their headquarters. So there's Japanese caves, there's extended battles there, and I would go out and explore the caves with my brothers, and search battlefields for bullets and remnants and so forth and so on.
You didn't find the gold stash?
No, I didn't find the gold stash, Yamashita's gold. Yeah, no, unfortunately not. Though we went to some of the places actually where this other adventurer guy did his program. So from there, back to Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., where I grew up, a place called Falls Church. And the last overseas posting that I was at before going off to college was in Morocco, where my father was the consul general there in Casablanca. So some great adventures there. We took this epic trip with my father and 2 of my brothers from Casablanca to Moscow and back overland in 1971. Then spent a summer with my brother, who was in the U.S. military in Munich. Went to the Olympics there. So, and then eventually graduated from high school in Falls Church, went to the University of California because my parents are from California, born in San Francisco, so we've always been residents. We all went to California to go to school, and I went to University of California. Like your previous guest last week, I went to 4 different universities: the University of California, Santa Barbara, the University of Po in southern France, the University of Paris in France, Paris, of course, and then eventually graduating from UC Berkeley in 1981. And then that's when my professional career started. I headed towards the Middle East with my roommate from freshman year, who was Lebanese American. He had done politics and international relations. And we were decided, we'll try our hand at photojournalism. We liked photography. So we headed to Lebanon, and that was another great adventure getting there. Eventually it took us a few months. But
so was this always the plan, to do photojournalism, or?
No, to tell you the truth, I had thought about going into film school. So when I graduated from Berkeley, I applied for film schools. I was not accepted at USC. I was accepted at San Francisco State, and I was waiting for UCLA. And I was sort of like on this wait list. And I even came down here to check on what's going on. And they said, well, we have to see who's going to actually show up, and then we'll see about you going to, well, didn't want to wait around. So the friend and I, his name is George Azar. He's become a sort of he's become a filmmaker. He's done some interesting film work. And we decided just to head off to Beirut, where, because of his studies, he was pretty sure the Israelis were going to invade Lebanon, and was just waiting for the excuse to do that.
So you wanted to be on the receiving end of
Yeah, we said, well, let's go, and I had been a history major, so for me, the idea of like living history and being part of history and witnessing history, and then in the case of being a photographer, documenting it, was appealing. My father was a great historian guy, so when we were traveling different places, he would go to historic places and tell us about those things. And he also liked taking pictures. He wasn't the greatest photographer. He always, documenting things. So growing up overseas, being interested in history, and then my friend saying, "Oh, I think the Israelis are going to invade. It might be an interesting thing to do." And so we headed off to Lebanon, and eventually made it there on Thanksgiving Day, 1981. And we started covering street battles there. It was a civil war was still going on at the time. And then eventually I had to supplement the income. We couldn't really make enough money covering street battles. I was working with United Press International, UPI. He was working for the Associated Press. I started teaching, to help make ends meet at teaching English at a school across from the American University of Beirut. And then the Israelis did invade in June 1982. So of course covered that, and then eventually was offered as a freelance photographer primarily for United Press International. Eventually was offered a job as a staff photographer in Belgium, Brussels, where they had their International News Pictures headquarters. So I went there, lasted a year there. Covered, did editing, and of course covered local stories there as well. And then for about a year, I sort of, was in between jobs. It was a transition period in the wire services. We call wire services, which is the United Press, UPI at the time. AP continues to be a wire service. And then at the time there was Reuters started to expand their photo service, and then the French news agency, which I eventually got involved with, expanded their French interest news agency to a international photo service as well. So eventually they offered me a job, and that was in 1985. But before going into that job, I got interested in the famine that was going on in Ethiopia and Eritrea. So I made some contacts with some of the Eritreans that I knew in Berkeley, because back in Berkeley, living in California. So I headed off there, and just on my own with a few, made some money over the summer and headed off there. And then that was another very interesting adventure. And eventually got the staff job with AFP, the Agence France Presse, Agency France Presse. And then for the next 20 years, basically, I went back between Cairo, being based in Cairo, and Los Angeles. I was the regional manager for Los Angeles, and EPA approached me, the European Press Photo Agency, the last people I worked with. They were setting up an international news operation with their European news agency partners. So they asked me to set up and run their Middle East photo operation. So I accepted that, went to Cairo, and started working as this Middle East manager as well as a photographer. And he eventually came back here in 2003, and then left came back here, no, not 2003, 2010. So I actually missed but my daughter and wife, my wife is a Nubian Egyptian from Abu Simbel village. So she stayed that year when the revolution took place in Egypt in 2011. And eventually they joined me after she graduated. And I've been living here since, and then 2 years ago retired from the news business, and I've been just working on personal projects and helping the wife with, we have some rental income properties.
Okay.
So
okay.
Home improvements and things of that as well.
So you come home to spend time and everything's on fire and bullets flying here too.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Interesting last year.
Yeah.
Well, you came here tonight to tell us a story about the Holocaust, and I'm not sure how many younger kids even have teaching about that these days. I don't know who's aware of it. Normally, Holocaust is always a horrible ending, but in this case, there was at least one happy ending out of it, and it's an amazing story of survival. And so tell us a little bit about how you got into this and what the basis of this story is.
Okay, well, one of my best friends, my oldest friend really, I've known him since I can remember. We went to elementary school together in Falls Church. His name is Albert Willner, and his father, which is the subject of tonight's talk, is a Holocaust survivor, and we're going to tell a little bit about his story. But so Al and I have done some very interesting adventures together before this one. One of them was somewhat related to this story, where we, in 1978, December 1978, after our freshman year of college, we met up and we spent like 3 months with the Eurail pass, going all over Europe, from the Arctic Circle to Morocco, and eventually parting ways in Greece, where I went to visit my parents who were stationed in Cairo then, and then he went back home. But during that trip, what he took the opportunity to do is to visit his mother's relatives, who they were not Jewish, so they were impacted obviously by the war, but nobody from his family had seen his mother's family since she escaped to the West in, I'm not sure the year, 1947 maybe, when they put up the wall between East and West Germany. And her town was close to the border of West Germany, so she would go back and forth and collect provisions and so forth. And at some point she decided, I can't live this way any longer, and she decided to escape to the West and stayed there. And that's how she eventually met her husband, Al's father, got married and so forth. So we made this trip to East Germany after procuring a visa in East Berlin. It was sort of, that's a whole nother story on its own. You'll see one picture that I have from that trip, because when we went back to the same place that we had visited in 1978. So Al Willner had done an extensive research on his father's story, and had set up a bunch of meetings with archivists and historians. But there was a lot of information that was missing, and one of the objectives of the summer trip in September 2019 was to follow the sort of the footsteps, the route of his father's Holocaust story, from being sent away after Kristallnacht in 1938 to Belgium, to eventually escaping a second death march in April 1945 as the war came to a close. So we followed his father's and grandparents' footsteps, so to speak, from Germany through Belgium to France, southern France, and then to Poland, which was, Germany and Poland at that time. It was Silesia, where his father was interned in these concentration camps, and eventually back to Germany, where he made on the second death march, he did escape. So I'll be talking about that. So he arranged, all these meetings with different people in all these, the Belgium archives, National Archives, museums as well, where there was information to be had. The French National Archives, the different regional archives in southern France. Poland, there's not much there because the Soviets took pretty much all that information with them, so it's a little more difficult to, so there wasn't much that we could actually get in terms of, and one of the objectives was, when we went to Poland, is to try to figure out the route that his father took on the Auschwitz Gross Rosen death march in January 1945, because he wanted to go back and do this walk in remembrance on the 75th anniversary that his father, along with 4,000 other concentration camp prisoners, took during that winter.
Okay. So you said that Eddie was sent to Belgium by his family.
Right.
Tell us where that started and developed into other things.
Okay, sure. Now, should I do we have that picture?
We can bring up some photos.
Yeah, this first picture. This first picture shows Al Willner on the left. That's my friend and his father, Eddie Willner. And Al Willner, like his father, was a career U.S. military, U.S. Army officer. He was a colonel in the military, and his father was a major. So we decided if you could pull up some of the other pictures, and we'll show the principal people involved in this story. Andy, maybe the next one.
Next photo.
Next photo. Okay. Well, when the next photo comes up, I'll talk about that. So this is Al Willner's father, Eddie Willner, on the left, and that's his grandfather, Siegfried Willner. This is the last picture of them. This was actually taken in the Greurs internment camp in southern France. If you could pull up the next one. And this is Eddie Willner on the right. After he escaped, he made his way through, and I'll explain this later, but this is him with the U.S. tank company from the Third Army that he surrendered to, and who took him in for 6 months. He helped around, did chores around the camp. They provided him with a uniform. They actually gave him training and gave him a weapon, and he stayed with them for 6 months. Next picture. So that's in 1945. And this is his grave at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. And next one. So this is This is the September of 2019. This is the planned route that we're going to take. Where starting up near the Netherlands, that first dot is in Germany. It's the hometown of his father and grandparents, which is München-Gladbach. So from there, he went to Belgium, and then to the third mark is the border between France and Belgium, and then down to these internment camps in southern France, which are at the bottom, and then up back to Drancy, a deportation center outside of Paris, and then he was taken by train in the cattle cars, the father and the grandparents, to Auschwitz, and then those markers are the places he was forced to work. Him and his father were forced to work, and then the route of the death march which is Gross Rosen there. It's in Poland now, but was Germany before, Silesia, and then into Germany, Buchenwald, Langenstein, where he escaped, and then where he eventually was joined up with the U.S. tank company. So, you want me to talk more about okay?
Yeah, I mean, so what we were talking earlier about his family deciding to make this move and send him into Belgium.
Right.
To get him away.
Please talk into your mic, Ken.
Oh, sorry. I had to change it with mics, folks, so bear with me for a minute. You had Eddie's family looking out for him and sent him off for safety reasons.
Right.
And then they ended up kind of going back and forth. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, if you could put up the next slide, and I'll sort of talk about that, because what we're going to do is sort of chronological order. This is actually archivist office in Germany, in München-Gladbach. If you could put up the next one. So here, this is relevant because what happened is that on Kristallnacht, November 1938, night of broken glass, Nazi, I'm not sure if you're all familiar with it, but they attacked Jewish businesses, burned synagogues, killed a lot of Jewish Germans. And that night, they took that house, which was Al's grandparents' house, and that's one of the places we went to, and he's holding a picture from the time that his parents lived there, from the time that his grandparents lived there. And that's one of the things that we did. We, as part of this retracing the footsteps, we went to the places that he knew of where his family had lived and other important landmarks. And we called this project Gathering Earth, and so we'd gather some earth from these different places. Yeah.
Sort of milestone
So
places.
he was sent to Belgium and after Kristallnacht, and maybe we could go into the Belgium ones, and we can, if you could, Andy, if you could go to the next slides. So these are markers. These are his family on his mother's side. Joseph Winter and Eddie Willner was the name of his grandparents' family. These are little plaques that they put in the streets and sidewalks in Germany. And most recently, they did put some plaques just last year to other members of this family, to people that had been perished in the Holocaust. This is something that they do all over Germany. And so if we could, so this is still in Germany. Next picture, please, Andy. So now we're in Belgium. We went to an archive there. We went to a number of different places, Belgium National Archive, as well as a place where they used to intern undesirables, and including Jews who were then eventually just deported to Poland and the concentration camps. But this is a document from his grandmother regarding her paperwork on her during the war. If we go to the next one. Okay, so there's Al Willner next to the archivist looking at a computer screen, and he's there with his brother and his family, who's standing, and his brother's son and his wife there. They joined us at different parts of the expedition, and that's them looking at documentation. So what happened is that he was sent, I think he was probably around 12 years old in 1938. He's born in 1926, I think it was. So he was sent there for his protection, as you mentioned. There's Jewish refugee organizations receiving children. The Germans were allowing children to leave. They were giving them exit visas, but not adults. So he was sent there for his safety. Now his grandfather, Al's grandfather, had been a World War I hero for the German army. He had gone to the Iron Cross and had fought in the Eastern Front and the Western Front as an artillery officer, spotter. And he was actually wounded, and he was actually provided with another Iron Cross by the Nazis by mistake. The Legion of Honor, the Iron Cross of Honor for those World War I veterans, heroes that had done the whole war. So he actually had gotten something. So he felt that because of his service as a World War II veteran, as a decorated World War II veteran, hero,
maybe he'd get a pass.
Yeah, that he was safe. Well, as time went by, and I believe it was 1939, they realized that the situation was getting bad. Already relatives had been sent to Dachau, and it wasn't so, but they couldn't leave legally, so they crossed the border illegally into Belgium. So for the next year or so, from 1939, to 1940, when the Germans invaded in May, they were living in Belgium, working. He was, Eddie, Al's father, was going to school, learning French and all that. And then when the Germans invaded in May 1940, they arrested, Belgium authorities arrested all the German adults, male adults, and they arrested Al's grandfather, Siegfried, and they handed him over to the French. They were busy fighting the Germans. I assume that they just needed to do something with all these, as suspicious, this was chaotic time. Germans were on the offensive in their country, and they're trying to resist the invasion of the Germans. So what happened is that he was handed over to the French authorities, and Al's father, Eddie Willner, and his grandmother, went in search for him. And they had heard that, that they were taken to the French border. So they went to the French border. That's where they were interned. And maybe we could see it. So this is a picture from, this is just there's this museum in outside of Belgium. This Caserne d'Ossant is a very interesting museum. This is just a picture from that. If you could go to the next one, Andy, and we'll try to get caught up. This is a document after the war from the Belgium archives about the Allied Expeditionary Force, talking about information regarding Eddie Willner. His German name was Helmut Willner, but when he was sent to Belgium, the Belgians don't really care for the Germans, World War I, and they're not very great relations. They said, hey, that's not, it'd be better if you sort of had a different name that wasn't German sounding. So they gave him this name, Eddie, and he kept that name. So his official name is Eddie Helmut Willner. So that's from after the war, that document. If you could see the next slide, Andy, and we'll try to get to France. So after Belgium, the mother, the father, and the grandmother went to try to find Albert's grandfather, who had been arrested and handed over to the French. So they went to the town of Vervik on the border of France, and they were actually interned briefly as the Germans were, bombing the place. And we actually made our, okay, that's France, but okay, there's anyway. We'll get to this in a minute. But fascinating story is that when we went to this place, or interesting story, went to this place, Vervik. And we got there late afternoon, the city hall, because Al had done, he'd done research, and his father talked a little about things. His father talked mainly on these interviews that had been done. He'd done a number of interviews with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, as well as the Shoah Foundation here in Los Angeles at USC. So but most of what he talked about was during his time in the concentration camps in Germany, and which was Germany at that time, now Poland. But he did talk a bit about the situation in Belgium. So what had happened is that they had been put in a prison there at the city hall. So we went to the city hall. It was late afternoon. City hall was closed. We're not sure what to do. And this guy, leaves the city hall, and we say, we talk to, and he happens to be the mayor of Vervik. Very interesting gentleman. And so
it's a nice chance encounter.
Yeah, nice. The chief of police was there. He took us into the city hall. He showed us the location where the jail had been. The city hall had been remodeled. He even took us walk through Vervik, because it also has a significant World War I history, because the battles of World War I were very close to that area, the trenches and so forth. Then he actually walked us across the border. There's monuments on the bridge there to the French side. So great encounter, a great, really interesting younger man. Also has interest in the Holocaust and is involved. So after that, they were sent to France. And this was something that, I'm pretty well educated. I had actually gone with my father to Auschwitz in Poland in 1971, as I mentioned earlier. And we had, so I sort of knew about the Holocaust. But what I couldn't figure out is why Eddie Willner and his parents, Augusta and Siegfried, had been sent to camps in southern France. What's the story there? Well, these camps had been set up the year before for the Spanish Republicans fleeing the Spanish Civil War and their defeat by Franco and the fascist forces. So they had set up these camps in southern France which were like 500,000 Spanish refugees, mainly Republican sympathizers or the soldiers. So
everybody's running into France.
Right. So they're just sending whoever the Belgians give them, and et cetera, to these camps. Now, a lot of these Spanish Republicans had already been somehow assimilated, but there was still a significant population of Spanish Republicans in these terrible camps. They were like temporary camps. Some of them set up on beaches and in areas that once in there, there's mud and filth, and there was, the condition was terrible. And I guess I should talk about this picture. Maybe we could, this picture. This picture is really very interesting, because the idea, what what I didn't realize is the extensiveness of the Nazi transportation system for slave labor. And that shows, this map shows all the routes where they would bring laborers to work in German industries, such as what his father and grandfather did.
So it was a real industry. They were moving people around all
Yeah.
over the place.
It was like, free labor. And then once I'm not a, expert on the Holocaust or World War II history, but I think most of this information is accurate. But when they came up with the final solution in 1942, then it was like, just work them to death. Well, those that can work, men that are able, there were some women that were not immediately exterminated, they just worked them to death.
Yeah.
So they spent the next, they were sent to these internment camps in southern France, which is interesting because one of them is Gurs, which is near where I went to university, at the University of Pau, which is next to that place. I didn't know about it when I happened to be there. But so they went to a number of these different internment camps. One was flooded out and destroyed, so then they had to move them to another one. But eventually what happened is that the Eddie Willner and his mother were released from the Gurs camp, and they went in search of his grandfather. And they learned that he was in this one called Saint-Cyprien, which was the one that ended up being flooded. And they sent all those people back to Gurs. And eventually what happened is that they would be able to visit, Eddie Willner and his mother would be able to visit him in this internment camp. But at one point when Eddie Willner turned 15, he wasn't allowed to leave. He was like, okay, now you can work. We need as much labor as we can. So Eddie Willner, and this is one thing that he says contributed, among other factors, for his survival, is that he was working in these fields as a young teenager, primarily in the vineyards, building up strength, obviously not eating that much. There wasn't that much food around, even back in, before this was 1940 to 42. So eventually he was interned again, and maybe we could, I'm getting a little bit off on the pictures, so maybe we'll go back to the pictures quickly.
Sure.
Okay, so so this is Drancy, actually. This is a little bit, I'll get to this picture in a minute. I'll finish with, if there's some pictures, next one. Do you want me to, should I talk about this Order Sur Glen?
Sure, we can.
Okay, real quickly, if you could put this one up. This is a terrible thing. On our way, this is not necessarily related to Eddie Willner's story, but on our way from Paris to southern France, Al had learned about this town called Oradour sur Glen in the middle of France that had been completely burned and destroyed, and 600 plus people massacred, the whole population of the town massacred, and now is a monument. If you could show the next picture. So this is what ruins of the burned town, which are there today. So it's a memorial that the French president, de Gaulle, I believe, probably set up as a memorial. I'm not sure if that was a French president. And so on our way down there, we needed to find, it was nighttime, it was getting late, and this happened to be in the neighborhood, so we overnighted over near this place and visited it. Terrible atrocities that that the Nazis committed. That there are so many of them, unfortunately, during the war. So then we got to southern France. If you could show a couple more pictures there, and we'll try to catch up with the southern France. So here is a tomb at the Gurs internment camp. Lots of people, and this is just a child that happened to be born there. Very sad. There are a lot of not only Jews, but lots of other undesirables that were interned in those camps that are buried in this cemetery. They died because of just sanitary conditions, disease and so forth. There wasn't, the French were not, torturing them or killing them, but they just didn't feed them, and it was just terrible sanitary conditions. So here's a French historian guy who's the son of a Republican, Spanish Republican that fled Spain to France. So he's the son, he's a local historian in that part, in the Gours area. So we were talking to him, and I was able to contribute to the endeavor because I speak French. So in these situations like him, he spoke French and didn't speak in English. So Al speaks German. So I was able to contribute to the endeavor by my ability to translate French and also so forth. And the next picture, and we'll try to get caught up real quickly. And this is just me talking to a resident that lived at the time, and we were asking about where this bakery was, because there was a story that Al's father related where he would sneak out of the internment camp and go get bread. And the bakery was just across the street from where she lived. It's just there was amazing coincidences that happened in this trip. The one with the mayor, for example, and this woman as well, and there were a few other ones along the road. And then if we can get to the next picture, I'll try to go through this sort of quickly. Andy, the next one.
No problem. Pro presenter is giving me a little bit of
okay,
problems,
no problem. I'll talk when it comes up. I'll tell. So then Eddie's father and his grandfather were interned in these camps, and they were put on these work details, supervised work details. But meanwhile, the mother was nearby, the grandmother was nearby, doing menial labor to manage, to make some money and so forth. And there was an opportunity where they were able to escape from this Rivesaltes internment camp, a huge camp. I mean, it's kilometers long. It's, I don't know how many dozens of barracks that there are there. But basically, Eddie Willner spoke very good French, having lived in Belgium now and now in southern France. So he befriended the guards, and they sort of looked the other direction. And some guards were not necessarily told, Nazi sympathizers.
All on board with it, yes.
Yeah, so he looked the other way. They escaped, and for a few months, they were free, and they joined up with Al's grandmother, and they were provided false identity papers by the mayor of this town called Ortafa near Perpignan in southern France, and then they were lodged in a church annex. The priest put them up in this church annex, and then in September 1942, the Nazis said, we want all the undesirables and all the Jews rounded up, and that's when they were rounded up, and there's not sure if they were turned over by an informant or or that as well. So then the real tragic, I mean, this is terrible what they've been already through, obviously. But then the terrible tragedy of the Holocaust is the next part of the story. When they're rounded up, everybody was rounded up, and the Nazis wanted the French Jews, and they were all rounded up as well. And most of them were taken to this Drancy place, deportation center outside of Paris, and there's we saw those pictures actually already. This is
the cattle cars.
Yeah, let's show this picture real quickly. This is Rivesaltes. These are one of the remnants of the barracks that Al was able to locate. This is the one that his father and his grandfather were housed in. I guess that's what you would call it. So he is gathering earth from that point there, and so. Okay, we missed some pictures there, but that's okay. They were sent to this Drancy deportation center, just only a few days there before they were put on these cattle cars, these infamous cattle cars, to Auschwitz, all three of them, September 10, 11, something of that nature. These are, just real quickly, is this on the screen? Oh yeah, these are these cards that we found in these archives in southern France that show information about their internment in these camps in southern France. So that's the documents that they allowed us to look at. At first they didn't want us to do that because they, like, oh no, we can't see these type of things. And this is, so let's put that on the screen. Yeah, this is Al in the, this is beautiful area. This is not necessarily the vineyard that he worked in, but there's lots of vineyards in that area, so these are the type of place, and that's Al walking in these vineyards. Maybe the next one, and we'll try to get caught up and this is that San Ciprian internment camp, which is on the beach. This is the only thing that's left of it. Next one, that was flooded, and this is, Al speculates that this was close to where the barracks was, where his father and grandfather were living, and he thinks that maybe this is the area where he escaped through the barbed wire, because he talks about crawling under the barbed wire and that type of thing as the guard looked the other way. So the next one, and we'll try to get caught up to Poland, because Poland comes next after Drancy.
Sorry, folks. Presenter is being a little finicky, so
no problem. I'll tell they're taken to this deportation center in Drancy. There's a museum there. There's one of these cattle cars. The actual buildings that housed them, that were incomplete at the time, terrible conditions as well, are still there. And they're actually immigrant housing, government subsidized immigrant housing. Sort of strange, to tell you the truth. They're very, not the best conditions. Kind of a
strange arrangement.
Yeah, exactly. So the picture that we saw before, a while back, I don't know where it is now. It was so after they were deported on these cattle cars to Auschwitz. Outside of Auschwitz, at a place called Kozel, there was a platform where they did the selections for those that were going to go to the Auschwitz extermination, concentration camp for extermination, and those that were going to be used for labor. So if you could put that picture up, this one, this is the original gas chamber at Birkenau, Auschwitz, before they constructed the industrialized, terrible crematoriums and gas chambers. And it was either the little white house or the red brick house, something like that. That's where Al and his family believe his grandmother was taken and gassed. We got there very late at night, and we got there late in the afternoon, early evening, and so we wandered through Birkenau at nightfall and into the night, which was very, very strange. We were like the only people there. Strange things like white rabbit, eerie feeling. There's a lot of that happened. I'm not so big on spirits and that, but there was definitely there was something there. Not only there, but in other places that we met. So from so his grandmother was perished there soon after she was selected, and his father, there was he didn't know what he should do. He was 15 years old. He's not tall, so he was not necessarily somebody that would automatically be somebody you could think about working. But he had worked in the fields in France, so he was strong.
He was scrappy and
and he stayed with his father, and they were then sent to these labor camps. The area around Auschwitz, there's a whole bunch of these other sub-camps, what they're called sub-camps, a whole bunch of them that they worked doing different things for, building railroad lines so there are a bunch of those that we did go and visit. And during this period of time, if you could show another couple slides, Andy, because so this is the where the terminus of the Auschwitz train was. So it's it's near Birkenau, and this is just a memorial to that. And if you could show us the next one. Yeah, and then this is this other platform where the selection actually took place, where his father and grandfather were selected to work, and his mother was then continued on to that other one that we just saw. So this is a memorial set up there. This is all present-day Germany. Present-day Poland used to be Germany. So from there, his father and his grandfather, we're in a number of camps. They ended up in 1944 at the Blechhammer industrial complex and prisoner of war and concentration camp. It's a huge complex where the Germans, in fact, there's before next to this industrial complex called Blechhammer, there was a synthetic fuel plant, which was very high priority for the Nazis. Run their air force and so forth. Eventually, that became a factor in the U.S. War strategy. But this was a Blechhammer concentration camp, and that's the crematorium that was there where his father and his grandfather labored until his father, who turned 50, grandfather,
Yes.
turned 50 and was, weak. One day he was taken to the infirmary. His father, Eddie Willner, saw him from outside, and after that, never saw him again. Didn't come back, and they're not sure how he was murdered, whether he was, given an injection, which a lot of people were at that time apparently, because there was no gas chamber there. It was just this one crematorium that they had built. So, so both of them, while they were there, and this was his father, or grandfather, was late. I think it was October of 1944 that he was murdered. But Eddie Willner and his grandfather, what they did there was the Americans, once they were able to get a foothold in Europe, in Italy, after the successful landings in Sicily and then the mainland Europe, they set up air bases that then could reach the strategic part of Germany, Silesia, which was very, they have coal there, they have manufacturing, steel. It's like the industrial heartland of Germany was sort of there.
And a synthetic fuel plant is not
and
the
the
place to
synthetic
be.
fuel plant, super. So the Nazis had set up these prisoner of war camps for prisoners of war, mainly British ones, but then of course the concentration camp ones where the Jewish prisoners were. So the Jewish prisoners were sent to dig out unexploded bombs and defuse those bombs, and Eddie Willner was part of one of those details. Many of those details came to a bad end.
Yeah.
He was fortunate that
So these were the Allied bombs that were dropped.
yeah, so
in the
this
air.
was a U.S. 15th U.S. Army Air Force that were conducting these missions, and they were massive missions, and the movie Catch-22, for example, that movie, they're in Italy and they're doing these bombing raids, and there's some pictures. Oh, here, if you could show this one, I'll just because I think there's some. So this is these bunkers. There's a guard tower in the background. There's these little personal bunkers where the soldiers, and there's lots of stories that I could get into about his father and the bombing and sort of trying to sabotage a bit the Nazi effort, because when the bombings happened, all the German guards would just go into the big bunkers, the huge ones. Maybe we could see, I think there's a picture of a big bunker after this. Well, this is the entrance to one of these big underground bunkers. That's a local historian, great guy, Marcin, helped us out a lot. See the next one. Oh, this is where you see Al's there. This is a group of students and their teachers who he gave a lecture to at a place called Loisy, in a small camp that his father and grandfather had labored in.
But basically, they just bailed and left them to their own devices.
Right. So
when the air raids were happening.
and so what Eddie did is, they wouldn't let any of the prisoners in the big bunkers.
Yeah.
I'm surprised. I thought there was a big bunker picture. Maybe we'll come across that later. But so they would go hide in those little small guard bunkers. Mm-hmm. And then after the bombing was over, they would call in, because Eddie Willner spoke German. He was German. Yes. He would call in from the phone saying, "Hey, there's a fire," and he would redirect the German fire brigades to a part of the camp where there was nothing happening. Oh. As a small part of his, trying to sabotage the war effort as best as he could.
Pay no attention to the fire over there.
Yeah, just go with this one. So we'd call these things in, and there was terrible stories about, as many of us know, about the atrocities that were committed there. At one point, he was shot when Nazi SS, because the SS were the ones that were primarily responsible for the concentration camps. Mm-hmm. where he just decided, started shooting people. And he wounded Eddie Willner, got a head wound, and he was fortunate enough to get fixed by a camp doctor, one of the inmates there, because once you get wounded and you're not able to work, they get rid of you. And there was just, it was just horrible. People, things were so desperate. Of course, we've seen lots of things, Schindler's List, people just throwing themselves against the wire. But one of the things that Eddie Willner, recollects that was a horrible thing that I believe it haunted him, for a lot of time in his life, was they would wake up in the morning and there would be like people hanged themselves. And one of his things that he was tasked to do, especially at another concentration camp, was to collect these people that committed suicide, put them outside the barracks to be collected to be either cremated or buried. So anyway, tons of obviously horrible atrocities. So once in the late '44. The war was turning against the Germans. It had already turned against the Germans, in 1942. But 1944, the Soviets were closing in on this part of Poland and Germany. So the Germans took, all the able-bodied concentration camp inmates, and they estimate that it's close to like 250,000 of these people from all these different extermination and concentration camps, and marched them west to Germany to be continued to be used as forced labor, slave labor. So Eddie Willner had befriended this Dutch young guy, his age, called Mike Schwab, and they were on they're all of these death marches. A lot of them were not just, most of them, there was a combination of like train transportation and trucks and walking. But this one particular one, the Auschwitz one of 4,000 prisoners, was one that was walking the whole distance. They walked the whole distance.
Wow. And nobody's in good shape.
No,
to begin with.
they're in terrible shape. And they started out, this one, they believe there was like 4,000 from the Auschwitz, Blechhammer, sub-camp areas, that they were marched towards this other concentration camp, which was sort of a distribution center called Gross Rosen. And this was 170 kilometers. And it was in the middle of a terrible winter, January 1944. And so one of the things that we were planning on doing, and we did do, is we wanted to try to figure out the route, as precise as possible. That summer, when we went there, that summer in September, we sort of tried to figure it out. There's not much, as I mentioned, those archives and whatever information there is, the Soviets took, and it's hard to access. So we made some research. These people from Blechhammer 1944 Museum and Historical Society were very helpful. We sort of drove the route, sort of get an idea of where he could possibly camp, where they could and lodge. And he was thinking, we'll stay in barns because that's what the Nazis did. They procured barns to put these prisoners in when nightfall came on these marches. It was a chaotic period. The Germans were trying to defend against the Soviets that were coming in. The civilian population, which was German, were fleeing the area. So it was a mess. They wanted to keep them off the main roads.
Chaotic.
They don't want, there was terrible things happening. They were executing people left and right. People were just dying. They had massacre. It was just horrible. As we learned, as we progressed, through this whole, researching the story. So then he was put on this death march and he had befriended this Dutch teenager, same age, and they hung together. And it's another aspect of his that he believes helped him survive. Both of them survive. Is this camaraderie? They were looking out after each other. Whatever food they could get, they would share, and so forth. So they made this death march, which eventually, when we got to this Gross Rosen concentration camp, which is this distribution center. So Eddie Willner was evacuated just days before the Soviets liberated the camp. And in fact, we had reached out to like American publications to think, oh, this is an interesting story. Al Willner and this army buddy of his is going to do this walk in remembrance. They might be interested. Well, they're all interested in the commemoration ceremonies at Auschwitz, the 75th, which happened in 4 days after we started on the march. So there was but there was like local press that was interested. We had Norwegian TV and so forth that was interested. So that's another part of the story, which maybe I'll get to depending on how we're doing here. I don't want to get too carried away. So anyway, just to try to finish up everything, he got to this Gross Rosen concentration camp, and while we were there in the summer, Al, he had done an amazing job organizing these meetings and interviews and research. But it was, there was we hardly had any time for any spare time
to dwell.
So
anywhere.
while he was talking with them, I went and checked out the concentration camp because we only had like an hour or so to be there before we had to get to the next meeting. And there he found a document from the French National Archives, which we had visited in Paris, but hadn't thought about asking about things to do with Poland and Germany and Silesia, But this was that showed the route of the death march.
Oh. Wow.
Of course, it was in the German towns because after that area, that Silesia was given to Poland after the war.
So everything got renamed.
It got renamed to Polish.
Erased.
So we used that as a basis for Als Walk in Remembrance, which was a great find. That was like, okay, now we just got to figure out what these names are in Polish, and we're going to map it out accordingly. And then as during the walk, we found out other information that then, there was some slight change. So from the from the Gross Rosen concentration camp where he was taken after the death march, after he actually walked in there. It was a terrible scene there. I'll talk maybe about that later. But days before that camp was liberated by the Russians, he was sent to Buchenwald. And then from Buchenwald, sent to this Langenstein, Zwieberg, camp, small one, but it was where they were building this tunnel complex in the Harz Mountains, Harz, where they had set up the V1 or 2 rocket complex nearby, where they built these, and you've heard those stories.
I've heard some of that before, yes.
So this tunnel complex they were building was supposed to be for a turbojet assembly plant, where they were going to, they had developed jet planes, and it was like 140 kilometers of tunneling that they'd done. It was incomplete, nothing had been set up there, but they were continuing to tunnel this thing, and it was just abominable conditions in this camp. The war was coming to an end. The Allies were coming in from the west. The Soviets were coming in from the east. It was just the conditions at this camp were just horrible.
Desperate to
horrible.
do whatever they could do.
The barracks that they had built were incomplete. Some of them didn't have any walls. It was just misery. Total misery. They were just being worked and dying. It was a quartz rock quarry where they were mining stuff, and that's at Gross Rosen camp. That was terrible conditions as well. But that Langenstein, he was there for this Harz Mountain thing, tunneling in this tunnel complex. But then, as things evolved, and a horrible task that he was sent to do was the crematorium. They ran out of. They couldn't procure fuel, so they had to bury the dead every day. And he was tasked with digging these mass graves for sets. There's a number of mass graves for 500 or so prisoners that died, and that's one of the only places in a concentration camp where there's a memorial where where the dead people are actually their bodies.
identified, yeah.
I know there's memorials at Auschwitz where they threw the Auschwitz-Birkenau where they threw the ashes, but this is a place that these Germans set up as a memorial to where the mass graves were then. So that's, not only was he doing that, but he was also, collecting the bodies and digging these mass graves. Just a horrible thing. And then as the Americans started to close in from the west, and they could hear the battles going on and sounds of war, the Nazis did the same thing with the prisoners, but at this point, Al's father, they had heard these things that they're going to just, they're going to march us into the tunnels and blow up the tunnels and kill us that way. Mm-hmm. So they were being, they said, okay, we're going to get all those able-bodied enough, and whether they're going to march into this tunnel, they were marching them in the direction of the tunnels that they had been, laboring in, and then American, armored, forces were heard in the distance coming around the mountain. They decided to turn around the column and march it east.
Maybe not such a good direction to go.
Yeah, it's like, okay. Well, this was April 1945, and the war ended, I think, May 1st or 2nd, 1945. I mean, Hitler killed himself at the end of April. So Eddie and his friend Mike Schwab said, listen, they'd been through that death march from Auschwitz, and they said, we've gone through a lot. We're not going to survive this one, death march. We've got to escape. Sure. So they had a plan with 4 other inmates, that when the opportunity presented itself, and the opportunity would be, they're being marched at night because the Americans were doing strafing, and they were doing less strafing at night than during the day, so they were being marched eastward at night, but yet there were still American aerial strafing operations taking place at night. And what the Germans, Nazis would do when the American planes would be flying overhead, they would just hide, extinguish their lights and hide, and leave the prisoners unguarded while the raid was taking place.
Attack was on, yeah.
So they were saying, okay, when that happens, and if there's like a river or somewhere, a place that we can mask our scent because they have guard dogs, we're going to take the opportunity to do that. So on the 4th night, I think it was the 4th night, they crossed this bridge, and at that time, American strafing operation took place, and the Nazi guards, took cover, so they started to run, and in all different, the three groups of 2 people each started running in different directions. Well, some of them were killed right on the spot. Eddie Willner and Mike Schwab were able to make it close to the river before one of the dogs that had been released attacked Eddie, bit into his leg, and they wrestled the dog and killed it, and were able to make their escape. And then for the next few nights, they made their way. They had underneath their prison clothes, because, and also he had got them tattooed. This is another thing that's sort of interesting that I learned. Not everybody was tattooed. No. Only those people that were in the Auschwitz concentration camp and their subcamps. Those that went to Treblinka or in those other concentration, they were just exterminated.
So there was no point in tattooing?
No tattooing them.
So it was basically the labor force.
Right, so to identify them. And actually, he got a second one apparently as well. So they had, Eddie Willner and Mike Schwab were always plotting to figure out how they could escape. But they knew that, especially when they were in Blechhammer, that even if they were to escape, they had these prison uniforms, they were skeletal, their shaved heads, diseased, the whole thing, they're not going to get very far. Even if the opportunity arose, how far were they going to get before they would be exterminated and all that, and before they would be captured and obviously then killed. So this time they had been able to acquire some civilian clothing from the guards at this Langenstein concentration camp because it was cold, the winter, February, March, it's pretty cold in Germany. Sure. So they'd acquired these uniforms that this civilian clothing that they wore underneath their prison uniforms. So once they escaped, they took off their prison uniforms. Didn't, it may have helped a bit. But
some help, but not a lot.
But what happened is they were then picked up, they were caught by local police force and taken to the chief of police of this, small town. And they had been informed that two people had escaped because they understood because he spoke German that there had been two people that escaped. So they deduced that the other four people didn't make it. And this guy didn't really, the Americans, the bombing, the war was coming to an end. He just wanted to get him out of the town city. So he told his deputy, take him out of town, take him to the next town. So the deputy took him to the end.
Dumped them on them.
Yeah, he just said go. So that was luck. That was another aspect of that Eddie Willner recounted that helped him survive was just
could have
luck.
gone the other way.
Just luck. I mean, having a buddy, being strong, speaking German was something else that helped him survive as well. But just luck. So they were released, and eventually, soon they made their way through the German lines. Early in the morning, during the night, they made their way through German lines. There's an interesting story about that. And then heard the mechanized, vehicles that they knew would be the Allies, and they went up to those people and gave themselves up. They, of course, they didn't speak any English, and this was a tank company for the 3rd Army, D Company, something like that. They're not sure where they had where they gave themselves up, because the logs of that unit, which they've been researching, particularly Al's sister, who was researching a book about that, but they didn't write it in their log, so not sure where the actual location where they infiltrated the lines, gave themselves up to the American tank company, and then told the tank company, listen, there's a whole bunch of soldiers, people's army people, older guys and young kids with bazookas dug in foxholes in the tree line.
Yeah, this was sort of the last-ditch dregs.
Yeah, and then a German-speaking American soldier got on the loudspeaker and said, "Hey, give yourself up. We know you're out there. Otherwise, you're not. You're going to pay the price." So they gave themselves up. They surrendered en masse, and they didn't have to fight to get that town. So listen, let's look at some more pictures quickly and try to get caught up, because then the next story, depending on, that would be the Walk in Remembrance, which I can go through quickly. Sure. So Andy, if we could just look at some of these pictures, and I'll just try to go through them quickly. We're not seeing these. Are we seeing these on? This one's interesting.
Folks can't.
Oh.
Folks can see them now.
That one.
This one.
Okay, so this is interesting, because I think the next picture after this shows Al when we went there in 1978. This is this hanging tree at Langenstein concentration camp. They'd make examples, and they'd hang people there. So this is us at this tree, and then if the next one I think is Al, there's Al there at the same tree in 1978. He's on the left. And he's there with his, I think it's his uncle from his mother's side, and maybe his aunt as well. There, that's when we went and made that trip to East Germany to visit his mother's relatives. And so continuing on, and I think we're pretty much. So this is the entrance to this Harz Mountain tunnel complex where he labored. It's not open to the public at this time. And the next picture. So this is the entry to it. We weren't able to go too far into it, and that's a French historian that works at the Langenstein Seeberg Museum. He wrote a book, and there were some pictures earlier showing the death march, the death march route, and the American movement of. So let's see. I think there's two or three. So this is interesting. This is the route that. The death march, because this death march eventually went on for like 3 weeks. In fact, it ran into the Soviets, and it turned north and back west and went up north. It was crazy. It went on until the end of the war. Wow. And so that's that shows. And the other things with all those arrows were the American those are American military. Those arrows, the red arrows, show the American military pincer movement around those Harz Mountains.
Squeezing them in.
And then on the right, the red are the Soviets coming in with, that's the Elbe river where the two forces met up at some point. So the next one, and I think, so this is that river, Velpsleben, I think it's pronounced. Not very good, but that's the river that his father and his father's friend Mike Schwab
Where they escaped.
escaped somewhere. We're not underneath that bridge. And there should be one more about the gathering earth thing. Yeah, these are these tins of soil, and they're just he marked the different places that he collected earth. There's Drancy, and then there's San Annenberg. Those are places in Poland, Germany, and Kozel is the. So those are different places in southern France as well. So that's the story of his father in general. This almost 6+ years
Sure.
that he was.
It's an amazing set of coincidences that got him through that whole
Yeah,
thing. At every point there was a choice or just that much chance that.
Yeah, no, it's so he was lucky, but he was clever. He was and like I mentioned, being able to speak German, being in relatively good shape, also living on small rations. I mean, even in France, they weren't fed very much, so he was able to. So yeah, it was thank God.
So maybe if. We talk about the Walk of Remembrance.
Yeah, we'll
briefly,
try to.
and then
Yes.
because I know there's some questions out there.
Yeah, so let's look. This is a good picture here, real quickly. I'll try to get through. So this is Al giving a talk at the Bunker Museum, the Blechhammer 1944. So if you're ever in that area, you got to go to the museum there. It's really interesting. So this is the route that he had mapped out. That he planned to take, which is pretty much what we followed. So he was giving a lecture there. And the next slide, I'll just try to do the slides here quickly. So this is a great organization. This is a patch they gave me. I put it on my jacket. It says the Blechhammer 1944 Association, the 15th. That symbol is the U.S. Army, 15th U.S. Army Air Force symbol, and then the barbed wire for the concentration camps. The next slide, Andy. And this is some local historians, and that's Mike Bales, the guy, his Army buddy, who he's done lots of hiking with, including doing the Appalachian Trail on the left. Mike Bales, that's who he went with for the whole 10 days that he was on the Walk in Remembrance. There's me on the right, and those are the three in the middle are Polish historians that are part of the Blechhammer 1944 Museum. In the next picture, we'll just sort of. So this is a guard tower at the Blechhammer concentration camp. Next one. And this was one of these huge bunkers that apparently work teams of 100 Jewish prisoners would be able to construct in like a week. Amazing. Next picture. Something I'm not sure of and this is an East German communist era monument at the Blechhammer concentration camp. Next picture, and this is the inside of one of those huge bunkers. I mean, it's like it's like a meter thick. Next one, and this is an aerial, U.S. Army aerial photograph showing. I don't know what that is, a B-17, I'm not sure, U.S. bomber from Italy bombing the Blechhammer synthetic fuel factory plant, which is burning in the down there. Next picture. And so this is the route that they took to and they would fly they only did like 16 missions, I think 16 bombing missions between the summer of 44 and the beginning winter 44. That's like 4 months, 15, 16 missions. But these missions involved hundreds of planes, hundreds of bombers, escorts until they couldn't go for any further. And they would just saturate bomb the place.
Everything.
I mean, they were the Americans paid a pretty heavy price. I think 100 and something planes were shot down, number of casualties. Killed and missing in action. In fact, maybe in the next picture, an interesting story, another story. This guy is Marcin. He's a local historian. He's doing research, and this is a famous picture of a plane that's been shot down and crashing on a bombing mission over Blechhammer. And behind him is where they found parts of the plane, and some of the airmen are still unaccounted for, and he's been doing research and trying to find where for the last
Missing airmen and
20 years,
planes.
yeah, where they are. And he's been in contact with the family. And in fact, they donated a uniform to that museum, one of the airmen officers that was missing.
Okay.
And so this next picture, so this is like the maps that a map that he used to actually walk the route. This is the first day, and it was hard to read. Next picture, but just wanted to show you what he was using. And this is what I used as the person that was documenting the walk in remembrance. I would head on out each morning, try to find where they were, do some photo documentation, try to find an interesting location. Sometimes, just sort of mix it up, fields, little towns, other places. So I was using this, he was mapping his route every 10 minutes. A signal would be sent out locating where he was with his Garmin GPS, and then I would be able to access it on the internet, on the phone, where he was, and then I would just make my way
Quickly drive
there.
over.
Yeah, quickly drive over and all that type of stuff. So here, this is interesting. The Soviets lost a lot of soldiers in their campaigns, as as you can imagine, when they were fighting the Germans in Silesia. This is one of the war cemeteries. Next picture, and I'll just try to catch up on these. Okay, this is interesting. This is them, their first day on the 10-day walk. This is passing by a bomb crater from the U.S. 15th U.S. Army Air Force. And next picture. And this is another bomb crater, which they created a little park, with a bench. And the next one. Try to go through these quickly.
Don't want to be near those when they go
All right,
off.
folks. Pro-presenter is acting up again.
Okay.
Okay, no problem.
all right.
So then the walk in remembrance, that was, he had wanted to, commemorate, I don't know if that's such a great word, but in commemoration, and also and you can never recreate, or of course, what his father went through and what these people went through, but to walk the same route, as a tribute of sorts to those people that survived, fortunately, but also the many people that died, and also he was hoping to tell the story. And that's where we met up with school children and other people interested in, he gave a number of different lectures, and he participated in these commemoration ceremonies, because this was like the 75th anniversary. So among, these death marches, at the beginning, not so many people were dying, but by the middle of these death marches, the week and everything, they were dying and they were being executed. So there are all these massacre sites in the middle of in day 4, 5, and 6 of the death march. So we, as I was exploring let's look at some more pictures. You want to get?
It's still
Okay, it's sort of glitchy.
on the
No
plane.
problem.
So we might want
One
to go
second,
to.
I'll have it all. I almost have it up. Give me
Okay.
1 second, folks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, it was a combination of many things that he wanted to do. And then my role was to try to not only document the walk in remembrance, but also, act as a liaison type of thing with the local historians, find out information, and we'd check this place out. And I'd also sometimes scout ahead for a possible camping area. It's not easy. You think, we thought these barns that looked like abandoned barns would be, no problem. You go
Yeah, throw a
sleep in
sleeping
them
bag
anytime.
out.
You go out here in Nevada and there's an abandoned building, you can sleep there. But everybody is looking at everything. All those barns and things like that are actually, people know what's going on there. So he wasn't actually able to be housed in. So they did a number of camping situations. They were housed in a school. Oh, here's this is a Garmin GPS thing that would mark every 10 minutes where he went. So this is, one portion of the walk. I'm not sure what day that is. Next picture. And then, so this is a Jewish cemetery, abandoned, of course. And this was near a location. An interesting story. I won't get, I know we've already spent a lot of time, but an interesting story is like, as we're hiking, we had this letter in Polish and in English from the Belgium in 1940, sort of explaining what we're doing, because we didn't speak any Polish.
Sure.
Not that many people speak English or French or German. Some people speak a little bit of German there. There are still Germans there
Yeah,
that are now
there's some
Polish.
history there,
but most of the Germans left back to Germany when, at the end of the war. So he, some suspicious villager, like, what is this? What are these people doing in the middle of winter? Foreigners hiking around. I don't like this. So she called the police. You follow them out of town on a bicycle, then called the police. The police came, stopped them. They were able to show the letter. And I think the policeman spoke a little bit of English and said, okay, fine, go ahead. So as they went, they were coming close to the end of the day. This was not a day that I caught up with them near the end. At the end of the day, they were so I didn't. So there was like they ran across this police patrol that had stopped them earlier in the day, and they were saying, well, we need to find a place to stay. They're near a city. And cities are hard places where to camp. So he took them to this Jewish cemetery, and it was like, well, we don't really want to camp there, man. Yeah. But because this is where the cops said that they could do it, they didn't camp in the cemetery. They camped outside the cemetery walls. But it was a bit weird for them to do that. But they didn't. So anyway, they had marked this on their GPS. So the next morning I went there and I photographed it. And so next picture. And this is them. I don't know, 3 or 4. It was wet. It's humid. The weather was, generally pretty good considering what it was like in 1945. It was below freezing during the night, freezing rain sometimes, high winds. In the day, it would get into the 30s, sometimes even up into the 40s. Here's another picture of, this is Norwegian TV interviewing them. Outside this place called Prudnik, and there's some interesting pictures from Prudnik, which was like midway through the thing, which terrible atrocities took place there. We see the Prudnik thing because we got there, and because of the Norwegian TV took their time interviewing him, we didn't actually. There was like a welcoming committee, the mayor, the town historians, 4 or 5 people. I don't know if the picture comes up. Were waiting for us. And there they are, okay, sorry, it's not. So there they are, the welcoming committee there that we're waiting for. Believe it or not, it doesn't look like it's sunset time, but it is sunset time. And then they had a program where they were going to show us the sites of historical interest, particularly from a Jewish perspective, because there was a Jewish textile manager, the factory owner, that fled and was able to, and then this is a picture of the textile factory where Hungarian Jewish women later in the war, because the Hungarian Jews were one of the later groups that were rounded up and sent to these countries, were forced to work making tents for the Afrika Korps and other parachutes. Well, as the war came to an end and these death marches were passing through, they just exterminated the 400. And then this next picture here, this is the Jewish cemetery and synagogue. I mean, no longer operational, but there's also a memorial set up there. I don't know if I put a picture there. There's quite a few, and I have to, the Poles, they have, this is that memorial to the Jewish Hungarian women that were, and there's a mass grave there, and he's placed in a rock, which is a tradition in Jewish tradition, a sign of respect for those that have perished. So the Poles have, they have done a lot to commemorate this part of their history. They suffered as well, as we all know, too. And then this is just some frozen fields. We can go through these really quickly. This is sort of like what it was in the morning. And this is pictures from a war crimes investigation that took place just after the war, Polish war crimes with the American, with the Allies. So these are pictures that they disinterred some of the mass graves that was from that site. And he showed us some pictures. And then this was where there's the principal, Al and Mike Bales, and there's me doing a selfie. And that's at a school where they were initially going to camp behind the school, but when we reached out to the principal, he said, no, we'll put you in one of the classrooms. So he came with his 2 kids and set them up in a classroom so they didn't have to sleep outside. Nice. So, and this is a picture. He's giving a lecture to his school children in a small town, and this is a monk who's looking at a page from the album that shows his father and his grandparents. And then let's see, I think we don't have too many more pictures. And this is another one of these memorials for a massacre site. That's normally, a lot of times the Nazis would just shoot them on somewhere not close to civilian populations, but often some outside of cemetery walls, not in the cemetery themselves. So then this is a map showing sort of where it's in Polish, but it indicates where war crimes took place. It's part of this monument memorial to a massacre site. And then let's see, and this is the annual commemoration in which they asked Al to participate in, where at one of these massacre sites, and I think those might be some of the students that he gave a lecture to later on in the day. And the next one, and this is just crossing, and it was pretty much Al and Mike Bales that did, but we met up with this family that housed us, and Al was very reticent about actually sleeping in a bed. So this is the only place that he actually slept in a bed, but they were insistent that they, and that's actually when I actually overnighted with them because I got a bed, I'm not gonna. So that guy decided to, here's a show in the next picture. So this is this Polish of German heritage, I believe. He stopped and we had some of this.
Looks like some drinking going on.
That's exactly right. Some vodka, local Polish vodka from this guy. And he spent the day with them, and they took these routes that were probably maybe a little bit, not sure if they would be accurate, but not necessarily the main roads, through the country roads, through. So he spent and then this next picture is there. This is, I didn't really want to drive at night, but I wanted to document how they were camping.
Sure.
So I went to this one location, and I'm glad I wasn't doing that, man, but it was so cold. So that's them camping. I think there's one picture. Next one, oh no, this is a Polish historian at another mass grave memorial site. Yeah, this is that lake where they were camping, and they're toasting the end of the day, and this is actually pretty close to evening time. So I wanted to document about that. But normally I wanted to get off of the roads at night. They get icy, wet, so forth. And I would hopscotch, 2 or 3 nights in one place, and then go ahead of them, 40 or 50 kilometers, and then they would catch up, and then 50, 40, 30 or so kilometers later, I would then hopscotch them. That's how. And this is just another, scene of them walking along these dikes in this beautiful landscape. The Silesia is a beautiful landscape. I don't know if any of you saw the movie Jojo Rabbit, but Jojo Rabbit is filmed in the Czech part of what was the Sudetenland, which is almost identical to what this place. It's adjacent to Silesia. Yeah. So if anybody's seen that movie, you can see what the countryside and the towns look like. Beautiful part. And they met people along the way. This is not my picture. Both Al and Mike Bales contributed to my documentation with pictures they took along the way, and they met people that were helpful in greeting them. And let's see what else is up. No, just another, typical churches and so forth. And these were some hiking couple out in the middle of winter that they came across late in the day, and they helped find a place where they could lodge, which was a storage shed at a campground. Mm-hmm. But it was locked. So they went and were able to get the guy that managed the recreation park to open up the storage shed, and they had a sheltered place instead of just putting up their tents out on the ground. And then let's see. Anyway, you want to go through these pictures? No.
Well, I'm thinking
questions.
I know there are people that are going to want to ask questions,
okay.
And I want to leave enough time for them, if that's all right.
Oh yeah. So okay, yeah.
Okay.
So
Andy.
So that's just we ended up at this Gross Rosen concentration camp. Mm-hmm. Let's just throw these some nice pictures. I'll go through these pictures really quickly. No, this one. Yeah, keep on going through the ones at the end. Oh yeah, I like these pictures. Show these pictures. This is this feature that's on the iPhone called Portrait Feature. So this was the last day. So we took portraits of each other with this portrait feature on the iPhone. That's Mike Bales. I think we look pretty macho, look like real adventurers. That's Mike Bales. That's Al Willner. And then there's me. Of course, I'm not all kitted out, and I'm clean shaven. I mean, I have my beard and stuff. So anyway, and then the next pictures are at Gross Rosen. That one, so this is outside the camp. They arrived late in the evening, which was sort of, I mean, his father also arrived there late at night, and then spent. And the next picture, okay, this is outside the entrance, which says, Arbeit macht frei, work will make you free. And then there's an Appellplatz. I don't know if I have a picture of that. Next one. Okay, I don't have the Appellplatz. This is the grape. Okay, so we're back at the beginning. So we arrived there late at night. There was the museum director there, as well as some of his staff. And then Al he wanted to spend some time on his own at the Appellplatz, where his father had stood all night long, and people just were dying still there. I mean, they were just dying. There was mud, and they would just fall into the mud and either just die or drown in the mud. It's a horrible scene. So that's our stories.
Quite the journey.
Yeah, it was. It was one
many years apart.
Yeah.
So Andy, I hope we have some questions in the queue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight, folks, and thanks for bearing with us. We have another new setup. And a lot of technical issues, but we managed to get through it. So thank you for bearing with us and listening to this just amazing program. So first question of the night comes from Shamsedine Nelson. Thank you for the question. D to Al's father, especially the one given to him by the Nazis. How did that happen if later they would make him a promise in concentration camps?
Well, that was it was an Iron Cross, but not the one that you get for military action. It was the one to, like I mentioned earlier, where they were honoring the World War I veterans and heroes. People.
So everyone got one.
Yeah, and he wasn't supposed to go to Jews, but he got it, and it was like signed by either Goebbels or Himmler or Hitler himself. I mean, he has that certificate, the thing. So it was just given to him by mistake, to tell you the truth. So it wasn't meant to.
The
and
irony.
Fortunately, like I mentioned earlier, he realized that his decorated, honorable war service wasn't going to protect him and his family. So he fled, but eventually, he didn't make it, his grandfather. Another.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Next question comes from Nabrasha. Where can we see more of the photo story?
Oh, good question. By the way, that's my daughter. I didn't mention my family. That's my daughter and my son. And they have these unusual names because their mother's Egyptian, a Nubian Egyptian. So there's Shamsuddin and Nabrasha.
I think Andy's doing pretty well with it. I hope.
Yeah. So if I've set up a blog site, and all these pictures and other information regarding the Walk in Remembrance, as well as the Gathering Earth, as well as other things that I've posted, you can find on this website that's called thedocumentarian.org. Thedocumentarian.org. So if you want further information, you can check it out there.
Absolutely, and just so folks know at home, there will be a link to that website in the description of this video, so you can click on the link and check out more of Mike's stuff there. Next question of the night. Okay, now that I know the game here. All right, next question comes from Shamsedine.
Oh no, good.
And I'm sorry if I butcher your names.
No, that's good. That's perfect.
All right. Well, then rolling on then. What's the story with the coincidence of the woman with the bread?
Oh, okay. Well. We were, as we were doing our research, this was down in Gurs internment camp in southern France. Al's father, Eddie, had talked about how he had snuck out of camp under the wire to go get bread. So we wanted to try to see if we could locate, because the town of Gurs is not far from this, this internment camp. So we went to look for it. And, you know, it was like, okay, we'll ask some people. We just seemed to happen to park near there, and this woman happened to be out there, and I asked her, you know, were you, she looked old.
Yeah.
I asked her, you know, were you around, or did you have relatives that were here during the war? Oh yes, I was here. I was a little girl, and oh, well, we're looking for this bakery. There was only one bakery in this little town. Yes, it's right, literally across the street. No longer a bakery. So, you know, it was
That
just
was the woman standing. in
yeah,
the
there was a
garden
woman,
behind
the
fence
older
there.
woman standing
Yeah.
there, and I'm sort of gesturing. Yeah, so that's all.
All right, thank you so much. Next question of the night comes from Nabra Shah again. And is there a favorite photo or moment you can tell us about?
From this journey, you know, the ones at the Gross Rosen, one of the last ones that I saw that we showed is one of my favorites, where you have Al just standing outside the entrance to the concentration camp with this picture here. This is one of my favorites. You know, he just finished this grueling 180 kilometer, 10-day trek in the middle of winter in Poland to arrive at this camp. I think it was like 7 p.m. Of course, the sun sets early, you know, back in 4:30. And he's just taking a moment to think about everything that's his father went through and what they've gone through. So that's one of my favorite pictures from this series.
That's all the questions from the chat. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and thank you for bearing with us with the technical issues. Ken, I'll let you close out the show here.
All right. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that. Mike, thank you very much for coming out and talking to us. It's a fascinating program. I learned a few new things.
Well, thank you.
tonight.
Yeah, no, it was great being here. And I like you. I love your club. It's a fascinating place.
Well, apologize again for the technical issues. We uprooted the entire AV setup and moved it to another room, and it's been interesting. So,
And why did we do that, Ken? Why did we uproot the entire AV setup and move it somewhere
we
else?
did that so that we could clear the room for reopening here soon, and have some seating for people who want to come and see these programs live in person. So, well, thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. Again, if you liked what you saw, go subscribe to the Adventurers Club of Los Angeles channel. We do this every week, except for Christmas and a few odd holidays. So we're always out here, always content. You can view old content. We've been going for well over a year now with programs. So there's a lot of content and interesting people to go listen to on the channel. So everyone, thank you again. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next week.